Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Eleemosynary Moment. My name is Brad Hathcock. I would like to take a moment to have a little moment of silence for Aaron Spears. I had learned last night at 2:34 a.m. that the FBI had broken into Aaron Spears' house and he was shot on sight. I have been getting warnings from the CIA to discontinue this podcast because we've been going too deep into the deep state and the WHO, and people do not want us to expose the one world government that is forthcoming. So let's please take a moment for Aaron Spears' death. Thank you, and now that that's been said, I actually just fired his dumbass. I don't need him producing any more podcasts for me now that I've taken over, since we've changed platforms. But all kidding aside, I didn't fire him either. He's just on vacation somewhere. So I decided to do a podcast by myself. As our avid listeners may know, Aaron had done a solo podcast by himself quite a while ago. It was about 11 minutes long and nobody listened to it. So I'm going to do one myself and hopefully people listen to it. I like to read certain articles that may or may not make their way onto the podcast. So since I am the one in charge of the docket today, instead of stupid Aaron picking his, dumb stories about things that no one cares about, I'm going to go ahead and pick the stories myself. Most of them are probably dumb and none of you are going to care about them, but they're things that I might find interesting, and so I'm going to read these myself. I'm not obviously going to read the articles to you, but just kind of give you an overview and give my opinion. And then stick around for a newly minted conspiracy theory corner that we have not done in a while. So, what I've been up to lately, not much. Pretty much just preparing myself for this podcast a little bit. Been kind of just like laying low lately and things like that. So nothing too crazy. But I will just kind of jump right in. So one of the things that I don't think a lot of people have ever heard about before is something called a Dyson sphere. What a Dyson sphere is ultimately a theory in which we could encapsulate the sun with some kind of basically like solar paneling. This would give the Earth virtually unlimited output as far as energy goes. And so it's a theory that has just kind of come along from some science fiction novels and things like that. I just don't think people understand these kinds of things. So it's essentially a hypothetical megastructure that encompasses a star, almost any star, but the biggest star that puts out the most energy would happen to be the sun. And it captures a large percentage of solar output. It's basically just a thought experiment to see how maybe like a spacefaring civilization would kind of get the energy that it needs. I find this to be very interesting, as the Earth will have to become a spacefaring entity at some point in its lifetime. Obviously, we've been trying to send people to Mars and talked about terraforming Mars and different things like that. And this Dyson sphere would be a potential thought experiment on how to harness enough energy to make those things plausible and possible. I guess people haven't really learned their lessons, when trying to do shit like this. Like, there had been talks about like blocking out the sun and doing different things to basically, or put some like reflective matter in the atmosphere to basically stop some climate change and from the sun basically baking people down on Earth. But I just don't think that this is ever going to be necessarily a possibility, at least not for maybe tens of thousands of years. And originally this was a thought that alien civilizations might be using this kind of technology to power themselves. And, we've seen here on Earth UFOs coming and going, and now the military is kind of, and the government is just kind of like saying, yeah, UFOs pretty much exist, and they don't care anymore. They've just kind of brushed past it. I believe that the majority of people probably believe that UFOs exist now and that they're just here. They come and go as they please, and who knows, they could be using technology like this. Clearly people haven't watched The Simpsons, where Mr. Burns tries to like block out the sun and stuff like that. And I just think that there is a whole litany of unintended consequences when you attempt to do something like this. But the power that it could generate could definitely be a possibility. But in an article I was reading about this, is the best way for this to happen is that we would basically just need to leave Earth ultimately, or we would need to find a way to break up these planets and mine these planets for all of their like metals and different kind of minerals and things like that in order to build this Dyson sphere around the sun. It's kind of dumb. We definitely don't have the technology to do this, and writing articles like this, it just seems kind of stupid. Like, don't you have something better to write articles about? Some kind of like journalistic integrity, instead of just spouting out dumb shit like this. Fortunately for me, I'm not a journalist, so I can kind of do whatever I want. I find certain articles like this to be interesting, although I don't think that they need to be read in any fashion, ultimately. It just isn't gonna happen. It just doesn't seem like it's a thing. This whole Dyson sphere was basically originated by a physicist and mathematician named Freeman Dyson. He's kind of being the first credited to formalize the concept of the Dyson sphere back in the 1960s. So this is something that's been around for quite a long time. It was actually inspired by a 1937 science fiction movie. And who knows, it's theoretically possible, but it would far, like the resources that are required for it far out, like weigh what is actually possible today, in my opinion, and not something that we're probably going to see in our lifetime or even 1,000 lifetimes. I think that it could happen maybe one day, assuming we survive the impending doom that Democrats keep telling us that we have every 5 years. Up till that point, it just doesn't really seem to be plausible. So moving on, that's just something that I thought was like pretty interesting, because you don't see a lot of articles out there, and we don't talk a lot about science here on the podcast, and it's just one of the things that I found interesting. But you'll see it, I guess, plays into a little bit of things that we talk about on the podcast, with obviously like globalized governments and things of that nature. It would require pretty much a global effort in order to even do something like this. Moving on, we have John Fetterman recently checked out of the Walter Reed Military Medical Center for depression. And we can see probably why he's depressed. His wife just kind of like up and bailed and went to Canada after he got sick and had his stroke. And now they're bringing out the giant vegetable back into Washington. He's supposedly going to be like about a month out. He's been supporting bills and apparently like writing bills allegedly that have been pushed through through the government, and he's been in the hospital this whole time. It doesn't really seem like it's real, but I wouldn't let that vegetable anywhere near any kind of legislation at this time. He says he's happy to be home. He's excited to be the father and husband he wants to be, and the senator that Pennsylvania deserves. Well, I think we deserve somebody who can actually do the job. nothing against having a stroke. Obviously, it's a pretty terrifying and devastating thing to happen to somebody. And he says he wants to be the senator that Pennsylvania deserves. Well, we deserve somebody who can definitely be mentally competent enough and understand enough to actually do what needs to be done for the state itself and in the federal government. So one of the things I agree with him about is he says, for now, I want everyone to know that depression is treatable and treatment works. He says it's not about politics. It's about people who are suffering with depression and everything. And he made that part very nonpartisan, which is good. Or bipartisan, whatever you want to say in that regard. He was getting treated for depression, which runs rampant, especially amongst men. And he's getting help for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. In this country, we have a mental health problem for sure that gets disguised as a gun problem in the eyes of the government. But he has definitely helped himself out a little bit in this regard by just getting the help that he needs, and good on him. Everyone should. But at the same time, you can't sit here and say that you're 100% and go back into work ultimately, which I think is kind of what started this whole situation in the first place. It's time to just, I think, move on and maybe change directions from him and try to, maybe have him just retire early and get something else in place there and get someone else to take that seat. I don't believe it would go to Dr. Oz. I think in Pennsylvania, the governor has the ability to appoint somebody to that seat should he vacate that seat. So that would give us an opportunity to see what Josh Shapiro is really made of, to see whether or not he would put John Fetterman's wife in that position is very interesting, because that would not be good in my opinion, but we all have heard that she has some political aspirations. And so I think that it's something that could happen for sure if things keep getting out of control for John Fetterman. That's something we could see here in Pennsylvania. And I don't like that either. I think that they should have a special election to replace his seat for sure. Dr. Oz would probably love another kick at the can, but hopefully they would keep him out too, because he's just a shit show. But that's where we stand today, and like I said, good on him for getting the mental health, since we do have a mental health crisis here in the United States that kind of gets disguised as a gun issue. And speaking of gun issues, this article that came out, I think is and something that has come from Mexico that I think is a very understated situation that probably not a lot of people have heard of. So Mexico has actually started to sue multiple gun manufacturers for guns being trafficked into Mexico. The brands that they are suing are Smith & Wesson, Glock, Sturm, Ruger, Barrett Firearms, Beretta USA, Colt Manufacturing, Century Arms, and Whitmer Public Safety Group. Basically, Mexico's lawsuit claims that the gun companies, quote unquote, know that their military style weapons are the cartel's weapon of choice, and they accuse them of reckless and unlawful marketing in their weapons. So the government had cited several instances in which firearms like Ruger rifles were sold to buyers in the U.S. and ended up in Mexico. So Mexico actually sued these gun manufacturers, and I believe it was in September, a U.S. judge struck down the lawsuit, saying that, they can't really do anything about it. And so Mexico had decided to appeal that decision. Well, since that appeal, several other nations, mostly Caribbean nations, have actually started to support Mexico in its appeal to these gun manufacturers. So the Bahamas, Jamaica, they've all kind of banded together in order to try and push this appeal. that's seeking about $10 billion in damages, which that's a lot of money. You know, I don't necessarily know that it would destroy these companies or anything like that, but that is a lot of money. I would say instead of going after the gun manufacturers, why don't you go after the fucking CIA, who's been running guns into Mexico and propping up the cartels for a very long amount of time, to the point where the Mexican government can't even get control of their own country because of the cartels. And that was strictly done by the CIA. So, this is being fought for sure. The U.S. Security and Exchange Commission said it vows to fight the lawsuit, and believes that the Mexican government's allegations don't really have merit. They have stated the guns used in the commission of violent crimes in the Bahamas are not manufactured here, but are manufactured abroad and illegally trafficked across the border, says the Bahamian Prime Minister, alluding to, you know, things are manufactured in the U.S. and then trafficked down to the Bahamas. You know, these Caribbean nations are saying that they have these gun issues and that they don't necessarily have drug issues, because the preferred trafficking done down in these Caribbean nations is definitely guns. So they worry about the guns on the streets as opposed to like illegal drugs that they have in rich countries. We all know Jamaica is like a hub of marijuana and things like that, which is fine. Now the U.S. can be that too. But in Haiti, they're kind of saying that police get outgunned by violent gangs, and because they purchase all of their weapons from the U.S., these violent gangs, and that the government in Haiti can't keep up because of a U.S. arms embargo, preventing them from being able to buy similar guns in order to fight back against violent crime. I have no sympathy, really. You can find an arms dealer virtually anywhere. The U.S. is one of the largest purveyors of firearms for the entire world, and I'm sure you can probably strike a deal or something like that. Maybe give something out to the U.S. if you wanted to end that arms embargo and make something happen there. I mean, how much does it mean to you? Instead, you just want to sue these gun manufacturers. And it just doesn't make any sense here. The appeal, I think, will likely get thrown out. You know, they filed the original lawsuit in Massachusetts, which Elizabeth Warren has a problem with guns. So probably, you know, they thought that it would be like a fairly liberal state that they could maybe push through there. But that just doesn't seem to be true. But it is gaining traction in other countries as well. So Antigua, Barbuda, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, pretty much all of Latin Caribbean area, like Latin America and Caribbean networks, are basically pushing in this lawsuit. I don't think it will go anywhere personally, but again, it's just another attack on the gun manufacturers that we see after every mass shooting. Ultimately, to try and keep traction on this, we all know we did just have another mass shooting in Nashville, and people again are jumping on the gun lobby and the NRA, which the NRA is dog shit to begin with. You know, they embezzled money and things like that anyway. They're just lobbyists ultimately at this point, and I don't really care for lobbying, so the NRA can go fuck themselves. But it's just, again, another set of people trying to gun grab. And if this lawsuit were to go through, I think that we would see many other lawsuits get pushed through by who knows. I mean, different states, different counties. It could be endless if this lawsuit ever passed or if this appeal goes through. So I'm vehemently against this. I think we need to fight back against that. But you never know. They could always just go to Russia for guns if they really need guns to maybe try and help compete. Russia is also a very large arms dealer throughout the world as well. So I don't see why that would ultimately change. Speaking of Russia, another probably not well-known article that just came out entitled "A Russian Spy Posed as a Brazilian Student to Get into an Elite University." It's Johns Hopkins University for a master's in international relations. And this program is basically positioned him to try and get close to the American security establishment. And this has happened in court. So the way things are working out in this article, if you take a look at it, and I can link to all of these articles as well when I post the podcast. It shouldn't be a problem. But ultimately, it's saying a Russian spy who posed as a Brazilian student in order to enter the U.S. and attend Johns Hopkins University as an international relations graduate program student. This happened in a federal indictment. Well, it turns out he was a GRU operative named Sergei, I'm going to fuck this up, Vladimirovich Cherkasov. He was 37 years old, and he masqueraded as a South American student named Victor Ferreira. And he was able to pass through and get his master's degree and applied for a job at the International Criminal Court. And he tried to get into the American security establishment. So the Justice Department is claiming that Cherkasov entered the U.S. in 2018 in hopes of gathering intel on Americans, and he made connections with a State Department employee. So they are charging him as a Russian spy, ultimately, right here in the backyard of America, in Washington, D.C., where everything takes place. This is a big deal. One of the things that he was trying to do was gain access through the International Criminal Court to obtain information about the investigation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So he's just trying to obtain information through this criminal court and see basically what the U.S. is claiming and using as fodder for the Russian-Ukrainian war. Again, kind of a big deal out here to see those kinds of things. It's not a good thing, certainly. And, we do this all the time. We let foreign people come in through visas to go to school and different things like that. We let a lot of Chinese nationals in as well on visas to go to school. And then they take their education back to their country and they come here to become highly educated, and then they go back and use whatever it is that they need to get, whatever skill they've acquired over that time, they use back in their home countries. And that's okay. I mean, it happens for India as well. They can come here and get educated, go back to India and help use those technologies and things like that. But, there needs to be some kind of scrutinized pieces here. Obviously, as this guy posed as a Brazilian and was able to get into a master's program at a very prestigious university, which good on him. I guess he had to earn his way in there. But, they probably falsified all kinds of documentation and things like that to get him in there. And then he was able to get inside the international security, basically, and kind of talk about a few of those things. And that's not good either. We need to be able to protect our institutions in that regard from Russia. And I think that the government will have to learn a lot from this. I don't know if it's restricting the amount of international students we allow into universities in any capacity. The university systems are struggling wholeheartedly to get students and things like that. So I don't know that that's exactly the best idea there, but they need to do something to increase the amount of security amongst these things. The last thing I would like to talk about before I go into my conspiracy theory corner is water rights. So there has been a push from basically think of it as like the World Economic Forum, but for water supply, or the Paris Accords for water supply. So through the Paris Accords, the United States entered these Paris Accords, and then they left them with Trump, and they're trying to get back into it with Joe Biden. It's basically an agreement amongst all these world nations that they're going to help fight climate change and things of that nature, which holds no teeth. There's no repercussions for not meeting your climate goals and things like that. And this is ultimately the same thing, but for world water rights. It's one world government, basically, for preserving the drinking water and all that stuff throughout the planet. And while it sounds like a good idea, same thing as the Paris Accords sound like a good idea, they left this agreement with basically no checks in hand. All the countries that were there said, yeah, this is a good idea, but they wouldn't actually pledge any money to it. It's another thing that just holds absolutely no teeth whatsoever, and they're just going to try and take control over all of the world's, drinking water and water in general, and basically assigning a one world government to control the water supplies. That's not a good thing, as we all understand. Having one entity in charge of resources is never really a good thing. You're essentially trying to socialize water, or turn that into like communist water, and that's not a good thing either. So people need to start pushing back against these kinds of things. Even the Paris Accords, while you can agree with it on its surface, they're ultimately not really a good thing, because there's no repercussions for not meeting your goals. So here we are trying to get back into the Paris Accords, which spends billions of taxpayer dollars from the U.S. to fund these other countries and trying to help them meet their climate goals, while we're not even on track to meet climate goals. Like, it's pretty much a joke. It holds no teeth, and that's a big problem. So, we'll see what happens with this. I think the problem is that it's very hidden, and that not a lot of people see this. That's why I said I wanted to talk about these things, is these items that I've brought up are news items that probably not a lot of people read. They're not going to be on the front page of any news source, really. A lot of places won't even talk about it. In the last episode, we talked about the One World Health Organization, basically, and them trying to become a one world government. And that's been definitely a problem. But not a lot of people even know that happened or is going to happen, and that's a possibility. The resources I got from that were from the UK. International sources tend to put items like this on front pages to make them actually stand out, and that doesn't happen here in the U.S. Everyone's kind of like enveloped in just like your stupid pop culture shit that like is on the front page, and nobody really cares about that, or should really care about that. It should be about these issues are huge issues that just aren't discussed enough, and nobody really talks about them. So, that's what I wanted to do in today's podcast, was kind of talk about these items that just don't get touched on enough. And that brings me to my last item. I decided a long time ago when we started this podcast that I was going to do a conspiracy theory corner. It was my first bit, I guess you could call it, where I would look at conspiracy theories and kind of talk about them. And I have not done that in quite a while, I would say. Definitely not in the new year. So shout out to Adam, our one diehard listener, for bringing this conspiracy theory up, and he wanted me to touch on this one a little bit, so I'm going to bring this one up. And this conspiracy theory kind of fits into a lot of what we've talked about today with like one world governments and things of that nature. And it is the Denver International Airport. So the Denver International Airport has a lot going for it in terms of conspiracy theories. There's so many conspiracy theories that the airport itself has actually, from a social media kind of perspective, engaged in a lot of these conspiracy theories, because there are multiple conspiracies that go into the Denver International Airport. And they've just kind of embraced most of them. Not all of them. Some of them are Nazi-based conspiracy theories, and they won't engage in those ones because they feel that some theories just aren't worth giving any salt to. And some of these are, I guess, kind of stupid, but some of them are definitely a little bit more intriguing than others. So a little bit about the Denver International Airport is that it was originally slated to be finished around October of 1993, but due to quote-unquote design changes, contract disputes, and other setbacks, it pushed the airport opening back to February of 1995. So we're talking roughly a year and a half worth of, increased issues here. Furthermore, the budget for the airport actually was about $3 billion more than it was originally expected to be. So why? Why would something cost $3 billion with a B more than its like original expectation? The facts of this have led conspiracy theorists to surmise that things are going on at the airport that we don't want others to know about. One of those conspiracy theories is that there are like 6 floors below the airport, and that these tunnels, that there's like these tunnels and these underground buildings. Some people claim to have seen them firsthand and everything, but ultimately, there's supposedly these like 90 miles of tunnels that lead to a NORAD building about 90 to 100 miles away. And this is something that I believe I've mentioned earlier on the podcast a while ago, kind of about the government having basically like a fallout facility for them in case war comes to the United States, or some kind of like natural disaster, some kind of like maybe apocalyptic event, where the like government gets, like, there are people who have an order of importance, and there's different badges that they get, and they're basically either in or out when it comes to having like something cataclysmic happen in this event, where they're basically going to try and preserve the government, and they don't really care about any of its people ultimately. And that kind of fits right into one of these conspiracy theories, because that NORAD area is actually in Colorado, about 100 miles or so from this airport. And I think that's totally plausible. They could use this airport to get people in and out, so that maybe they don't need to have a landing area, or that they can fit bigger planes into these areas and bring them into the Denver International Airport and basically whisk them underground to get these government officials to safety, and maybe not have eyes on them as far as small planes go, or people like looking out for that NORAD area. So that's something that I think is definitely plausible in this situation, and I wouldn't discount that part of the conspiracy theory at all, just from obviously the things that I've read and things that we know to be true about how the government acts and that it doesn't actually care. Another thing is the artwork at the Denver International Airport. There's multiple different kinds of artwork. There's some artwork that kind of shows Nazis and things like that. There are gargoyles out there. There's an artwork titled "Children of the World Dream of Peace." And there is a giant horse that has the name Lucifer, that has these like demon glowing red eyes. That, you know, one of the theories surrounding this horse, this like sculpture, is that it actually fell over and killed its artist during the construction of it, which kind of would go into like everything that happens with the gargoyles, right? So gargoyles are typically used to ward off like evil spirits for churches and other buildings and things like that. And if this demon horse sculpture killed its artist, it could be cursed. So they probably added those gargoyles in to make sure that the building itself isn't cursed, because let's face it, they just want the nice piece of art and they don't care who has to die for it. It's like the same reason why they had the soccer stadium in Qatar or Qatar or whatever you want, where like 3,000 people died or something, making that for a fucking soccer stadium. Nobody gives a shit about soccer, at least not here in the U.S. So they just kind of like ignored the fact that all these people died and were put into like basically slave labor to build a fucking soccer stadium. So the art's a little bit weird. There is a dedication capstone, and it's basically saying that groups like the Masons and the Illuminati and other basically like one world governments, the Masons, and have a long history here in the United States that's been talked about even in fictional movies like National Treasure, things of that nature. But basically there's a great hall with a plaque that is a dedication to the airport. It kind of shows like some of the contributors and everything, but the very first name listed on the stone is an organization called the New World Airport Commission. The thing is that organization doesn't actually exist and has never existed, so there's really nothing on it other than the fact that it is on this stone, this capstone here, and basically they're saying like, oh, it sounds very eerily like the New World Order or secret society and all these things, but we know that the government has had secret societies. People like Alex Jones and other reporters have actually kind of started to dig into these areas where the government, government officials are out praising like a fucking owl god and weird shit like that, and that can very well be true. We all know that the New World government is very progressive and very liberal, and that kind of jives a little bit, I think, with Colorado itself. It's pretty liberal. It's pretty progressive. I mean, they're allowing the legalization of mushrooms and psychedelics and things like that, which can be used to keep people stupid. I'm all for the legalization of pretty much all drugs, or at least decriminalization of it. But that can also be used in different ways. We've seen the government use LSD and things like that in MK Ultra experiments and stuff. So why not start in Colorado? If you're going to try to build like a new world order and have all these secret societies, which we know people are part of. I have a friend of mine who is part of the Masons, so maybe I'll try to get him on here to talk about that kind of thing. Everything we've talked about over the last like few episodes, and with the WHO trying to basically become a one world dictator government over every country, basically, where they determine whether or not something is a crisis, and you can't reject a crisis anymore if we basically give them this power. I think that's everything that's kind of involved in this whole conspiracy theory for the Denver International Airport. The artwork itself, art is very expressive, and forever art has been used to depict real life. Art imitates life is kind of the saying here. And I firmly believe that, and maybe art does imitate life here. There's multiple other conspiracy theories about the Denver International Airport, and one of them is that the runways from an aerial view kind of depict a Nazi swastika symbol and things like that, and those ones are probably a little bit unfounded or don't matter. But the ones I chose to focus on today are definitely plausible, in my opinion. But why does it matter if they do it to an airport? It doesn't. I think that the proximity of 90 to 100 miles of a government facility for NORAD is actually probably where you need to focus most of your attention on. I believe that like the NORAD facility probably has its own like small airport, but maybe given certain circumstances, you need to keep people away from that area. And so it might be easier to and less chaotic and threatening if they just kind of pull into Denver International and, go underground and start moving themselves to that NORAD facility. That's definitely a possibility in my opinion. So I think that some of these are possible. Some of them seem just a little bit asinine, which is okay too. But I'm going to go with plausible on this one. There's no way that you spend $3 billion additional dollars for an airport, nonetheless. And especially back in the 90s, like $3 billion like over budget is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think the state would have that in any capacity. So something had to have been pushing this along, in my opinion. But that brings us to the end of Conspiracy Theory Corner, and I hope everybody enjoyed that one. I'm sure Aaron will be back, unfortunately, for all of us. I hope he had a good vacation. He's probably going to get a pretty good ribbing when he gets back, but thanks for listening, everybody. And I just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, SledgedGaming.com. Go to SledgedGaming.com for all of your keyboard, microphone, and custom needs for gaming. And thanks, everybody. See you later.